All right. Well, with that, it is 10 o'clock and it is the 6th of April. I appreciate everyone joining us for WEC's Resource Adequacy Discussion Series. I'm going to take a quick look at some upcoming outreach events that we have here at WEC. First off, we want to announce the State of the Interconnection. It's the SOTI. It was released earlier, I guess, last week, and it provides a high-level snapshot of the risk in the West and the accomplishments of the past year in the Western Interconnection. There's a link that was just shared in the chat where you can access that. And then mark your calendars for our Summer Outlook 2023 event. That's going to be held on April 26th and 27th at 10 a.m. to 12 p.m. Mountain Time. And that's a preview of summertime conditions and preparations and operations in the Western Interconnection. It's a two-part webinar series, so mark your calendars. And I believe there was a link that just went out for that as well. With that, I'll introduce myself. I'm Travis English, Senior Training and Outreach Specialist here at WEC. Welcome again to the Resource Adequacy Discussion Series, where we'll be talking about navigating a regional approach. Take a quick look at WEC's antitrust policy. All WEC meetings are conducted in accordance with the WEC antitrust policy and the NERC antitrust compliance guidelines. All participants must comply with the policy and guidelines. This meeting is public. Confidential or proprietary information should not be discussed in the open session. This webinar is also being recorded and it will be posted publicly. By participating, you give your consent for your name, voice, image, and likeness to be included in that recording. WEC strives to ensure the information presented today is accurate and reflects the views of WEC. However, all interpretations and positions are subject to change. If you have any questions, please contact our legal counsel. With that, I'm going to turn it over to Chris Raper. She is WEC's Vice President of Strategic Engagement and External Affairs. Chris, take it away.
Thanks, Travis. Good morning, everyone, and thanks for logging in to the next in our series of resource adequacy discussions. Today, we are talking about how to navigate a regional approach. We have invited Sarah Edmonds, the President and CEO of the Western Power Pool, to get us started off in an introduction, but by way of setup, in February 2023, just a couple of months ago, FERC approved a tariff for the Western Resource Adequacy Program, the WRAP program, first regional program of its kind in the West. The WRAP program and the CAISO Resource Adequacy Program address much of the load in the West. So interoperability of those programs, we believe, will improve reliability in the Western Interconnection, which is a very good thing. And really the question then is, how does interoperability of those programs work? What kind of conversations have been had? So we have Partha Malvadkar, and I'm so sorry, I probably did not do a very good job with that last name, but he is the Principal of Resource Adequacy and Infrastructure Policy at CAISO, who can share after Sarah's intro what kind of the parallels with the CAISO program and at a high level how those programs will complement one another and or communicate with one another. We have Rebecca Sexton from the Western Power Pool. She's the Director of Reliability Programs, and she's here to represent WRAP and things within the WRAP program. And then Koslow, who is the Director of Federal Regulatory Affairs and Compliance with the Arizona Public Service, is here to kind of give the view of the utilities and how the utilities are reacting and responding to these programs as they're rolled out and as they sort of decide how they will work together. So with that, Sarah, I will give you the mic and allow you the introduction of the Western Power Pool and the new WRAP program.
Thank you so much. It's so nice to be here with all of you. I'm just going to provide a little context for this panel by way of introduction. I really like this quote, NERC official, in the context of the recent NERC long-term reliability assessment. And this person said, "We are living in extraordinary times from an electric industry perspective. There are extraordinary reliability challenges and opportunities in front of us." And so it's in that spirit that we come to you today. I'd also like to quote from WEC's Western Assessment for 2022, where one of its findings was resource adequacy risks increase over the next decade. After 2025, each subregion shows an increase in supply-demand risk due to retirements throughout the decade. In addition, variability on the system continues to increase, primarily due to increasing amount of variable energy resources and increasing demand variability with record levels of peak demand. And so we're coming to you to talk to you about what it means to approach resource adequacy through a regional lens, which is really the foundation of the Western Resource Adequacy Program and all of the different utilities that came together to build and design this program over 4 years ago. We do have the recent approval from FERC. So for the first time in the history of the West, there is a FERC-approved tariff that sets up a region-wide resource adequacy program. It's not part of an ISO or an RTO, and it's voluntary. There are no state, federal, or other local mandates to be a part of this program. It is attracting load service entities because they believe it's what they need to do to be reliable for the future and because of the benefits that they get from the program. So a little context, Rebecca is certainly going to go into this at a little more depth, but this context is important for the overall conversation. By its structure, RAP is an RA, Resource Adequacy Planning and Operations Compliance Program. It's for load service entities, and it operates, or it's intended to operate alongside all of these other grid integration structures that we have going out here in the West. That includes the California RA program, which is designed and primarily run by the California Public Utility Commission, but the California ISO has responsibility through its tariff for implementing a number of the elements of the California RA program. So it's a little complicated in its nature, but here we are, RAP, attempting to operate alongside that program, but also contemplating a future where we would operate alongside different markets. They could be extended day-ahead market through CAISO or SPP's Markets Plus, or even potentially future regional transmission organizations that might blossom in the West. By its function, RAP is an RA capacity pool. It's not a terribly new or unique idea. It's a capacity pool for resource adequacy planning purposes that's really seeking to leverage regional diversity with the potential to lower the collective planning reserve margin for the participants when we're in our planning horizon. But as we get into operations, we need the ability to tap into that diversity and actually take advantage of the pool and benefit from the pool. RAP is an insurance policy against the worst of days. RAP is not a load service program. It is an insurance policy for when we're in the worst of conditions, those edge case conditions. You know, the exciting value prospect of RAP, and Rebecca will have her map, is the tremendous breadth and depth of our footprint. So really, truly a West-wide program, some new entrants into RAP that we're excited about. And that's really great because we're bringing to bear the resources, the loads, the transmission that we can use to leverage that diversity. The challenge, of course, with such a footprint is we're going to have to deal with all of these overlaps and overlays. This is a product of the unique pathway we've taken in the West. And I know that among some stakeholder groups, that can be really frustrating, that we have all of this complexity and all of these different building blocks that we're trying to answer. How does it all fit together? And because our pathway has been unique, because we've taken more of a building block approach to grid integration, we're necessarily in a position of having to define some pretty unique solution sets for answering how this all works together. That might be lamentable to some, but I would observe it's just our situation. And we are going to tackle it, and we are going to do it in a way, each program looking to see how can we make sure that by working together, we're all still getting the value proposition out of these different programs for our end customers. Is the value being delivered? Have to observe that RAP is at this point spanning most of the West, and we will have a border alongside the California RA program that's been running for almost 20 years at this point. So we're certainly the new kid on the block when it comes to resource adequacy. Both programs are looking to solve a similar task. What do we need to do to make sure the lights are on under strained conditions? But both programs are going to use different approaches. They're going to have different assumptions, different methods, different functionality. And because of those differences, there's this concept of a potential RA to RA program seam. Usually we use the word seam when we're talking about market to market differences. But in this case, I think it's helpful for understanding the concept of the programs are trying to solve similar things, but because they have some differences, there is the potential for one or more differences to get so out of whack that we could be threatening reliability of the integrated whole. And that's really the mission of drilling down into looking at the different RA programs and talking about how are they going to work side by side. And Rebecca and Partha are also going to share their thoughts today on that topic and what we're doing about it. I mentioned before, very real likelihood that you have a pretty broad west-wide wrap footprint, and inside that footprint, you have an extended day-ahead market footprint and also an SPP Markets Plus footprint. There'll be a seam in between those markets, and the question of wrap interoperability with markets is introduced. Our panelists are also going to share some observations on where that conversation is. And really, that's really the same kind of thing I mentioned before, which is when you layer all these different pieces on top of each other, can each program still deliver its value proposition when we've added all of that operational coordination and overlap? Finally, I would observe that wrap is an RA planning construct, and it's by its nature overlapping with a lot of different states in the West, where utilities are regulated by those states and are engaged in their own resource planning through state processes. So we acknowledge and recognize that overlap, and Rebecca and Ali are going to talk about how that is being managed in the different, by the program itself, by utilities that are facing this issue, how it might be impacting utility planning and different operational approaches. But I'm here for wrap and Western Power Pool, and I would like to end on the observation that our driving principle is reliability. It needs to be the priority concern for the West, in our view, and a lot of views of others. It's an exciting opportunity to see delivering a reliable, clean energy future for vast portions of the West. No matter what your resource future looks like, wrap is a way of delivering that future in a reliable manner, inclusive of all of the different inputs and outputs that are happening across the West right now. And it's quite a time of change and evolution. So to sum up, wrap has had a lot of success. We're really proud of the FERC approval that we recently received, and also obtaining quite a critical mass for launching our first phase, which is essentially a non-binding informational program. We have challenges ahead. We are still working to identify our first binding season when all of the compliance obligations of the program and the operations program of being actually able to tap into the pool come into play. So there's still work to be done, but I would say that we've had tremendous momentum and success so far. It's a framework that's here to stay, and we look forward to continuing to be part of conversations like these that answer the question, how are we going to put all of this together in a way that delivers reliability and value for our customers? So thanks very much, Chris.
Thank you, Sarah. That was terrific, which is exactly why we asked you to do the intro for this. I think you're wonderful at framing these types of conversations, and you can set it out in a clear way that we can have a great conversation. So appreciate your intro of the group and welcome you to stay and be a part of the conversation as we go forward. Also want to let anyone that has dialed into this know that we will take questions throughout this discussion, and I've got some of my team behind the scenes who will help manage the chat. Our panelists don't have to worry about that. Just sometimes you get beyond where the question is if you don't ask the question right away. So me and my team will help manage that as we go forward. Want to give each of the panelists just a couple of minutes to kind of introduce themselves and where they're at with these things. And if we can we start with Partha, and we'll give you a couple minutes, move to Ali, and then to Rebecca.
Sure, thanks. I'm Partha Malvadkar. I'm the principal of resource adequacy here at the California ISO, and maybe just to level set, would you like me to give sort of my introduction on the California RA program now, or do you want me to wait for after everyone gives introductions?
No, please. Yeah, no, go ahead.
No, it sounds great. So, yeah, I really appreciate the opportunity to speak here today, and look forward to the questions. Yeah, I just want to start off by congratulating Sarah, Rebecca, and all the participants who developed the RAP program on the significant progress made to date in getting the RAP tariff approved by FERC. I certainly know what a significant and transformative effort bringing a well-functioning RA program up to the West is. One of the things I was going to do really quickly is give a quick level setting on RA in California and at the California ISO. And really this is maybe just to compare and contrast a little bit with the RAP program, as well as to share some of the updates, because this is really a sort of a transformative time within California as well in terms of our resource adequacy structure. So just in terms of regulatory responsibilities, in California, CAISO shares responsibility ensuring resource adequacy within our balancing area with local regulatory authorities. Each of these regulatory authorities have different responsibilities, where particularly the local regulatory authorities have the responsibility to set their own planning reserve margins, which are applied to the monthly load forecast to set RA requirements. Within the CAISO footprint, CAISO oversees approximately 80% of California's electricity needs. And within that hybrid regulatory landscape, within the CAISO footprint, roughly 90% of the load is served under the CPUC's jurisdiction as a local regulatory authority. So a lot of the stuff that we'll be discussing will really, as Sarah described, have overlap between the PUC jurisdiction and the CAISO jurisdiction. Also, as Sarah alluded to, the CAISO has various functions within that RA space to administer the LRA programs, including having must-offer obligations. And we have various processes to have planned outage substitutions and coordinating those efforts, as well as various backstop authority measures, particularly for significant events and for load-serving entity deficiencies. In terms of the IRP program, which is really obviously kind of the foundation needed to have a reliable plan in place and allow the annual and monthly RA program to work well. There's also been a significant amount of new resources that have been ordered by the PUC in the past 4 years. The CPUC's IRP plan has 18,000 plus megawatts of new capacity that was already ordered to come online between 2021 and 2028. And on top of that, in February, the CPUC ordered a procurement of an additional 4 gigawatts of new resources to become online by 2028 as well. If we're looking at a little further, it's even a sharper increase with 86 gigawatts identified in their preferred system plan by 2035. And one technology in particular, at least sort of stands out in terms of that transformation, where, for battery storage in particular, the IRP portfolio identified roughly 11,000 megawatts that was going to need to be built by 2025, and almost 30,000 by 2035. And this really has a major impact in terms of how California, looked at RA planning, given this large increase in the number of batteries. We consider a few years ago, we were at, a few hundred megawatts of battery storage. And this is just really a major change in terms of planning and operation. So in terms of the regulatory and programmatic changes, the CPUC has adopted, the CPUC recently adopted a slice of day framework. And that's really has a paradigm shift that's really trying to address largely the storage issue, that large amount of storage that's coming online. So under that slice of day framework that the PUC is adopting, each load serving entity is responsible for demonstrating that they have capacity to meet their gross load profile plus a PRM in all 24 hours. And that's including being able to show enough energy and to meet their storing charging needs associated with the batteries that they're showing in other hours. So, and in terms of that, the CPUC is also assessing compliance to meet that gross load plus PRM on an hourly basis. In terms of next steps, I think that one of the key and critical elements is to get that PRM set right to ensure that the RA program can meet a 1 in 10 standard, using LOLE modeling. And ultimately, based on the current trajectory, RAP and the CPUC's RA programs, they're looking to meet similar goals, obviously grounded in LOLE modeling, but with currently the CPUC currently looking at a slightly modified framework, based on sort of different counting and evaluation methodologies on an hourly basis to determine need. Finally, I'll note that at CAISO, we're looking sort of similarly at sort of changes to our RA program, particularly in the near term, to making sure that they're still able to operate and work sort of seamlessly in the near term with respect to our backstop and outage processes, et cetera. So, yeah, I'll stop there for now, but yeah, I really appreciate the chance to sort of give that sort of high-level introduction to California RA, and yeah, look forward to the further discussion.
Thanks, Partha. Ali.
Thank you all for having me today. I think I bring a little bit of a different perspective than the rest of our panelists, as we are trying to figure out how, as a utility, we are going to change the way that we do our own planning in order to help us really take advantage of the RAP program. So we were one of the later entrants in the region to this program, and there are a lot of things that we saw as very beneficial, and the reason why ultimately we decided to pull the trigger and join up with the RAP. So it's going to offer us, as we know for sure, an opportunity for better RA planning across the region. Most utilities, certainly Arizona Public Service that only operates in a single state, do planning on a very localized basis. The way that we look at, our forward horizons is really just local to our own balancing area. And that's the way that we've done it for decades, a very, very, very long time, right? This is bringing in a completely different paradigm. As Sarah described, now we're going to be looking at RA on a very much more regional wide basis. And we're excited about the possibilities of what that's going to do to help us potentially reduce our own PRMs, which we see climbing every single year based on more variable resources, more variability of weather patterns. It's very, very warm here in Phoenix and very, very mild in the shoulder months. So we have major swings in our peaks. And so these are things that we are really looking forward to using the RAP to help us manage. We're also excited at the possibility of more diverse resource and load that we can tap into and not have to potentially do as much overbuilding in our own footprint. We already know that Maricopa County, which is the largest portion of our service territory, is the fastest growing county in the entire country. And we have seen immense load growth, which also means that we are doing what everyone else in the region is doing and struggling to figure out how we are going to build resources or procure resources fast enough to keep the lights on. So we're really looking at RAP as a way to help us on those really, really hot days here in the summer. So we don't have to do quite as much in terms of over procurement of resources. We know that RAP is going to support the grid reliability in the long run by ensuring that that generation exists across a much wider footprint, and also just the fact that we're going to have a common metric for us all to abide by. That might seem really sort of rudimentary, but it's not something that we've ever had in the West. And so on those really, really stressed conditions days, you don't want more than one utility thinking that they're going to rely on the exact same resources and then have an issue where you're in an energy emergency, or you're struggling to figure out how you're going to keep the lights on, and it's not going to show up for one of you. So this common metric is really something that we are absolutely excited about and looking forward to seeing how we're going to be able to take advantage of that for our customers. And I think, Chris, I'll leave it there as an intro because I think we're going to get more into like how are we going to integrate with IRP planning. And so I'll leave that for that question coming up.
Okay, thanks, Allie. And I know at first blush you may feel like, or it might look like you're the outlier of this conversation, but I think the reality is that the type of policymakers that call and listen in on these conversations, how the utilities intend to respond and react and participate in these programs in the West is actually a very important question for them, and something that they may not get directly any other way. So I really appreciate your willingness to participate in the conversation.
Absolutely.
And Rebecca.
Good morning. I'm thrilled to be here, and thanks, Sarah, for that setup a minute ago as well. So if it's possible, I'm going to show just one slide of our current footprint, because I think that's an important place to kind of ground the conversation. I'm on one screen today, sorry. So hopefully this will work. Okay, so this is our current footprint and our participants listed down the side. You'll note that we are, as Sarah said, covering the vast majority of the West at this point. We've got one very new entrant last week. We got a signed participation agreement from Public Service of New Mexico. And so to Allie's point, we've had a lot of interest from the Desert Southwest folks in the last couple of years. We've had APS, SRP, Nevada's been in since the very beginning. But we've had this recent interest, and we're really excited to be bringing New Mexico into the fold. Obviously, it's a bit like a fire hose. So we expect to have more of that to come with some additional participants and continue talking to folks in the Southwest. But we're currently standing at 22 utilities. And embarking on this conversation, as Sarah noted, to figure out, I'm going to stop sharing and that way I can see you, to consider how we're going to move into the binding version of this program. So I'll give maybe a bit of a status update to ground us all. I think, as Allie noted, this all started in 2019 with many of the same utilities, but 2019, the idea of solving the problem highlighted here, that many utilities are making all kinds of different assumptions, some of which may overlap when they plan for resource adequacy. And so feeding into that IRP process, I know we want to talk about later, the idea of imports, especially interesting as we talk about seams. What does everyone assume is going to be available to them in those worst of times? And certainly any utility, especially planning on a smaller footprint like a single utility, is going to have to assume that something is out there import-wise to keep their lights on. And how do you know what the real depth of the markets are, or what your neighbors might be planning on as well? And so that's where the idea of a regional resource adequacy program was born. And that's what we are working to accomplish with this binding program, where everyone needs to show up. And I apologize if this is very basic, but to make sure everyone's on the same page, the program is basically two parts. 7 months ahead of a season, everyone needs to show up and demonstrate that they have forward procured enough capacity to meet their planning reserve margin and their P50 1 and 2 peak load. And so we set a regional capacity need, we divvy it up between participants. We basically say, if everyone brings their fair share to the musical chairs game, if you will, for an extended metaphor, then we'll all have enough places to sit down if the music stops on a really hot day. It might mean that someone's sitting in someone else's chair for the day, but we know that we'll have enough to go around. Then we hit the operational time horizon, and that's where we're watching 7 days in advance, and we're watching when the music might stop or who's going to need help, and we're coordinating amongst these utilities in that pool that Sarah mentioned to make sure that everyone is going to be able to access capacity that they might need. And we hope that all of this gets solved even more efficiently with these markets we're all talking about. We know that folks will be encouraged to solve these issues on their own, but the backstop really is making sure that there is enough capacity in the RAP footprint that if you really need it, you can count on your neighbors and they'll find you a place to sit. So We do that with this sort of binding backdrop where you do need to show up with the right amount of capacity in that forward showing, sort of under threat of a non-compliance charge. And that really motivates everyone to do the right thing and bring their fair share to the game, if you will. And then in the operational time horizon, we motivate folks to support each other in those times of need by having a binding operational obligation. So in the case that your neighbor needs help, you are sort of, again, under threat of a non-compliance charge, obligated to potentially sell to them the capacity that you've brought to the table. So that's the way that we're able, as Ali kind of teed up, to lower planning reserve margins on the whole by saying, if we all do this together, we need a fewer chairs. And so that's where we think the value proposition is. And we also are really interested in how we can continue to expand that value proposition by understanding how that seam that Sarah noted with the CAISO's various programs and the way in which the RA is done in California, as well as in other BAs adjacent to us. We recognize that especially in imports is a place where understanding what's going to happen across those lines is really of interest to folks, and understanding what people are assuming might be available so that we can all kind of ground truth what our assumptions might be as we try and meet the reliability metrics that all of these programs are aiming to keep the lights on for each of their utilities. So we are in the midst, as Sarah said, of putting our governance together for this new program now that we're FERC approved. We're working through business practices, so there's still a lot of details to be figured out about exactly how our program is going to be operated. And so there's still a lot happening. You know, RAP is not done despite the FERC approval. There's actually quite a lot of work still happening to make sure that everyone has all the information that they need. And we're looking, of course, to continue to expand the footprint as we get more of these details put together and are ready to kind of continue to bring more utilities into the fold. We certainly have heard some interest. I'll leave it there because I know we have many questions to cover too.
Thank you, Rebecca. I love the musical chairs analogy or picture in my brain, except that one of those people always loses a chair, right?
Yeah, this is going to be the most boring game of musical chairs. That's the goal. Yeah. A really boring game of musical chairs. Yeah.
I love that. I might steal that and use that in the future. I just think it's a good picture. So I'm going to ask some general questions. I want anyone who has an answer, please, to chime in. And I'm going to go with a little bit of what each of you touched on. You know, Partha talked about the planning reserve margins, and Ali was talking about IRPs for states. And so how is this? How is the RAP program and CAISO's RA program? How is it going to affect resource planning? Are the states going to be looking at a different kind of IRP now that sort of encapsulates a regional approach? Will planning reserve margins with the states change, or is it an overlap and an overlay of the broader footprint of the function of these RA programs?
Maybe I'll start and then maybe Ali can speak to the way in which this is working for you. So certainly we've had lots of these questions. We had really good engagement from state regulators when we were working through the governance of the program and trying to understand how to overlay this regional program with those existing constructs has been really important. And so we've always tried to take a really light touch with the RAP. So making sure that we contain the scope of the RA program to the things that are totally necessary to do on a regional scale. And so that means that we will set the amount of capacity that's needed in the region. And what's left for everyone to continue to work through on their own is how they meet that need. So there is an overlay or a place where we want to make sure that the state regulators are engaged in the conversations around how to make the modeling for the planning reserve margin work. And so that's where we've had this great experience working with the state so far to begin setting up the Committee of State Representatives, the COSR, and given them a lot of special engagement opportunities to make sure that they are thoroughly engaged in our governance process, because we know this is a space that does kind of overlap with the IRP process. But the many of the questions that they are used to answering, like what resources will a utility use to meet that planning reserve margin, are entirely left to that state process. And so we like to say resource agnostic. We set the capacity need, and then each of the utilities determines how they meet that need. And when it comes to setting the need, certainly we'll want to work with states to make sure that everyone is really comfortable with the way that that's done. But as Ali pointed out a minute ago, this idea that we'll have a region-wide look and be able to have, I think, more confidence in understanding how we set that planning reserve margin regionally, with the expectation that it should be lower, principally should be lower when everyone is able to rely on the diversity of everyone else's load and resources, than the same reliability metric met alone. We're just able to do this with a bunch more insight when we're getting information from utilities across the region, and can do that with more confidence. So maybe I can punt to Ali to talk about, we've certainly seen the ways in which different utilities are approaching this very differently. Some are saying, this is the timeline of RAP is about 5 years and IRPs are much longer. So some don't see that relationship really strongly. Some have important assumptions about, say imports that don't comport with the way that RAP regulations work. And so they are seeing really significant impacts to the way that they're thinking about their IRPs and the planning that they're doing to procure the resources earlier than they might have. So Ali, do you want to talk about what you guys have been doing?
Yeah, sure, absolutely. So first and foremost, I think would be remiss if we didn't say that the ability to realize benefits from RAP participation is very dependent on the integration of RAP into the IRP process. So that's just central tenet of all of this. I guess the kicker is we don't really know how to do it. So it's forthcoming. We just got FERC approval. We are very much newer entrants into the program. And while we are very excited about the potentials of the program, we are still trying to figure out how we are going to adjust our IRP process to realize the benefits of RAP. The good news is we are in an IRP year this year. And so we have a lot of very smart people on our resource planning team working on this very issue as we speak, trying to figure out how we are going to line up the timelines. I mean, a big challenge, as Rebecca just mentioned, is that the onset of the timelines for establishing PRM and RAP and our IRPs are just not congruent. They're not the same. RAP's timeline is much shorter, and ours, is a 15-year look ahead. And so we're trying to figure out now what we need to do to adjust our own IRP planning to really take advantage of RAP. So I wish I had some really amazing answer as to how we're going to do this. And I know that we will. I have full confidence in our team and our ability to integrate this. And like I said, the idea that we can reduce that PRM in the long run, that's real dollars for our customers, because we end up doing a lot of over procuring and a lot of overbuilding to cover us for that really outlier scenario where perhaps we've lost some resource. It's 120 degrees. It's also hot in California and in the Pacific Northwest. And we're really struggling to figure out how we're going to keep the lights on in those situations. So what we end up doing is doing a ton of over procuring, often at significant cost for our customers. And those are the types of things that if we can really figure out how to integrate RAP into our IRP process, we hope to be able to eliminate. So I really can't give you a great answer as to how we're going to do it right now. But what I can tell you is we have a very, very strong motivation to figure it out, because the delta is going to be hugely impactful, not only for reliability, but also for cost to consumers.
I'm sorry, Chris, I'm realizing I'm a little remiss in just noting, because Ali teed this up so well, that one of the big things that we work directly with a lot of the utilities participating in RAP on is just understanding that because of the way we've done this planning across the region, every single utility is starting at a different place. They're starting with different reliability modeling that they use to inform their IRP. They're starting with a different approach to how to meet that reliability, right? And so there is not one single utility, logically speaking, that has been doing all of their planning exactly like the RAP will mandate that planning in the future. So even the delta is a little bit hard to conceptualize sometimes, because it's not as though everyone has been saying, you know, I know that I need to have all of my resources 7 months in advance. I need to map them with firm transmission. I need, you know, all of those requirements that we agreed were really important to bring reliability to the table are unlikely to be standards that every utility has been hitting. So some folks may see increased costs and may not see a delta that is just bringing the planning reserve margin down, because the thing that they might be seeing is, oh, I should probably do things differently than I was doing in a more reliable way. So theoretically, everyone should be getting either a reliability delta or a cost delta or both, but it really is dependent upon their starting point. And that's where even just the decision to join the RAP is a really individualistic sort of thing, because of the way we do things in the West, to figure out how to state the benefits of the program in a way that relates back to the starting point of each of our utilities. I mean, it has to be, I haven't been here for all of our attempts to bring regionalization to the West, but it has to be one of the issues that has stopped us from many of these big regional coordination activities throughout time.
Thanks, Rebecca. Sarah, you're so funny putting your hand up. Please go ahead. I cannot hear you. There, try again.
Okay, sorry. I wanted to see if I could loop Partha into this, because it occurs to me as we're having this conversation that what we're doing outside of the California RA program in the West is applying a lot of discipline and methodological approaches to something we've all been doing on our own. So we've all been doing it different ways, not with the same potential diversity benefit, but it's been happening. And of course, outside of California, there's been resources getting procured in a forward basis, either going to California or not going to California. But what RAP is doing, in my mind, is it's got the potential to apply a granularity around the timing for forward procurement to meet RAP and the kind of quality of firm resources and transmission that RAP requires. My question for Partha is, and it's really a question I think for California and RAP to work on together, I don't think we know the answer yet, which is, does RAP have any downstream impacts on California RA planning, in the sense of what was assumed as being available outside of California could change? Its nature, availability, timing could change because RAP is sending different signals and different mandates that haven't been in place before. So question to Partha about where his thoughts might be on that issue.
No, that's an excellent question. And maybe before I get to that, your question, maybe I'll sort of set it up with, yeah, I think that what you are saying about the coordination between the IRP and the RA programs is critically important. And recently in California, the CPUC sort of asked a series of questions, which we responded to with 40 plus pages of ways to sort of better coordinate, align our RA processes and our IRP processes, to basically give that sort of, to basically be sort of grounded into IRP modeling and to make sure that everything's sort of flowing through sort of seamlessly into the RA space. More specifically to your question, Sarah, just in terms of sort of the impacts of RAP, I think a lot of that is sort of uncertain. I think that part of what the RA programs are doing, and that you're alluding to, is that suddenly, often what we're doing right now is obviously, when I say we, I mean throughout the West, you're sort of planning in a vacuum without necessarily the full transparency in terms of, what is going on in other markets. And so I think that to the degree that there is, additional information and transparency that comes out of the RAP program, that could be I certainly think that could be very impactful to policymakers here, just in terms of the contracting practices, resource assumptions, et cetera. And that, yeah, I think that certainly I can imagine it having an impact in terms of in California in the long run. But I think that's all sort of undetermined, but I think it partly determines on sort of what data is made available, what's the timing of that data, can it work with existing processes, or do those existing processes need to change because of when this data and information is coming out? But yeah, I do think that transparency and that visibility will be very impactful to the entire region. So yeah, that's an excellent question, Sarah. I really appreciate it.
Yeah, along those same lines. So I think Partha, what I heard Partha say was TBD, right? That's one of my favorite acronyms. And I heard Ali say that also with APS. Some of these things we're going to have to learn as we go. And so what is while RAP is not a market, and we're not specifically talking about markets here, the reality is from the map that Rebecca showed, if you look at an EDAM map and a RAP map of where their programs are and who they cover, they're similar and they are overlapping. And so CAISO has some impacts in other areas that are not just RA, to the point that Sarah was making, you know, how will these things impact CAISO when they're not sure exactly, you know, the ability then to reach outside the state of California for those things. So what is the low-hanging fruit here then? Where do we begin those conversations when it is to be determined sort of how they will interact as the RAP becomes broader and binding and those things? What's the low-hanging fruit? Where should we start with those conversations?
I'll give maybe a high level answer and kick it off. So WPP is sort of approaching these conversations with both market operators from the perspective of, you know, we've got a bunch of participants, they're signed up, they have made the decision, the value proposition is there to join the RAP. And what we want to make sure is as we get into the details, we think for sure there is a great value to overlaying markets, the economic, you know, incentives for markets and the efficiencies that they can provide are not objectives that the RAP was seeking, right? The RAP is a reliability focused program. And so the idea of being able to overlay that economic dispatch is great. And we think that in principle, we've tried to construct the ways in which RAP hands off, the timelines and those sorts of things should work with the market. What we want to do is as we get into that next layer of detail, which we've been doing with both market operators, is make sure that we can see the ways in which the value proposition, the reliability benefits of RAP will for sure still be delivered. And so we understand that each of these, you know, all the overlays and all the ways we've decided to do this incrementalism in the West will mean that we may all need to be a little bit flexible. There might be some impacts, but as we think about how to do that, that we are sure that the value proposition provided by the reliability program is still maintained. And so that means making sure that when we say that people are going to pool their resources together for this capacity pool, that they can rely on their neighbors to show up in their time of need, or when they forward procure all this capacity that we require they demonstrate in the forward showing, which is frankly the vast majority of the way they'll actually serve their load, that they can get to those resources, that their showing is valid, and basically that when it comes to the time they actually need to deliver those resources, that those resources will make their way to the load, because that's sort of the basis upon which we've built this RA program. So necessarily when we built the RAP, we built it in the bilateral market with the understanding of the way that capacity and transmission and energy will work in the bilateral market. And we're excited to see how this transition happens. And we think there's a path where this is all, you know, certainly there's some thinking that has to be done, but there's a path where this all works together. The question that we're coming to the table with is how can we be sure that that reliability benefit will be maintained and folks will still be motivated to participate in the reliability program as the basis, sort of the foundation for this incremental approach that we're taking in the West. So that's where we're coming from. Ali, what are you thinking?
Well, so what I was going to say, Chris, to your question is, I think everyone knows that APS has not come out and decided to be an early mover in either market. We are funding phase 1 of SPP Markets Plus. That does not mean we are joining Markets Plus. It means that we are interested in seeing what the paradigm will be that they can come up with for us as a market option. At the same time, we have been exploring and working with the CAISO on EDAM principles for the better part of the last 5 years. So we are looking at markets. We know that a day-ahead market is something that we need, but we need this first. And we probably need it a little bit more right now. And so I think we have a real concern about how the markets are going to overlay on top of RAP. Especially in an EDAM, for instance, where you will naturally have 2 different RA programs working in one economic dispatch model. That all feels very complicated and honestly esoteric at this moment. And so I think there's just a lot that we are frankly looking to both WPP and CAISO to give us some indication of how that's going to work. And frankly, it's going to be incumbent on SPP to do the same, right? How are they going to ensure that other members of Markets Plus, if we were to join that, who may or may not be members of RAP, still have to show up and provide the same level of reliability obligation that we do. So there's a lot to consider there, Chris, and the markets just add another layer of complexity. But I will say when it comes to EDAM, the idea that there's going to be 2 RA paradigms having to work together, that's very, very complicated and a little bit concerning for us.
I appreciate the candor. And yes, I as soon as it came out of my mouth and I finished the question, I did not mention Markets Plus, and I should, because the reality is that map of the RAP program incorporates people who are looking at the Markets Plus program also. So it is an SPP and CAISO consideration for how that day ahead will interact and impact the utilities who are participating in either direction on that. So I appreciate, Ali, that you brought that into the conversation. And we get back to my TBD, right, on some stuff to be determined, because we don't know until we know. We don't know what we don't know yet. We do have a couple of questions from some of the people who called in to listen, and we have a couple minutes left for that. So I want to toss out there a couple of related questions that came in were, how much lower do you expect the PRMs to be under RAP participation? Will that actually impact what the states are doing with PRMs? And then who will be in charge of the overall planning, which will identify development options for further review by the states and provinces?
Well, I will take a run. This is a hard question, a really hard question, because we don't have insight into how each individual utility or state process has arrived at their PRM. And so it's really, this is the everyone has a different starting point answer that is, I know, not very satisfying. But the idea is, we've certainly looked and seen that we can just if everyone were planning the same and we had, looking at coincident versus non-coincident peaks, we know that there is a benefit in theory of multiple percentage points. But as we've constructed this whole plan, right? We've got monthly planning reserve margin numbers based on monthly loads. It's just not likely that those are going to be easily comparable to the ways in which folks have arrived at their planning reserve margin previously. So that's exactly what I mean by having to work with individual utilities to try and understand, okay, you had a planning reserve margin, but here are the assumptions that were different. And this is why we think some of the RAP basis or assumptions in the compliance obligations are more reliable than the way that you were thinking about this before, or this is the way that you were on the same level, and look, we could compare these 2 PRMs in this way. So it's very individualistic, which I'm sorry to say is a little unsatisfying. When it comes to setting the planning reserve margin, that's modeling that we do in conjunction with Southwest Power Pool as our program operator. And so they supply that modeling back, and then our independent board takes those planning reserve margins each season and sets them a year and a half in advance of the season itself. So that's how that piece is done. The actual planning for how to meet that we try and give people as much information as we can, given the timelines of the RAP. So we set the planning reserve margin. It's a year before people need to meet it. But we also give 5-year look aheads with the intent of being able to help inform the process happening at states to decide how to make plans to actually bring the capacity to the table. So we are not facilitating that broader conversation. That's what we expect to still happen in the ways that it has previously, but we are adding that piece of information. And I think to Allie's point, we recognize that some of those conversations, most of those conversations are happening on a really longer term than the 2 years or so that the RAP binding compliance metrics are out. But the 5-year look ahead is supposed to at least head in that direction to give better indication of, if I install more solar, what would the capacity value of that solar be? Or if I start installing batteries, what would that look like? Or just how much capacity am I going to need probably around 5 years out? So those 5-year metrics aren't binding, but they are supposed to inform that conversation that we would expect still happens, in the way that it has been with states or municipalities or however that conversation goes to decide what resources they'll be building.
Right. So in its simplest terms, because that's how my brain works, the PRMs that will be established by the RAP aren't intended to then be imposed or replicated at a state level, right? They'll do their independent, and it is longer term.
Well, I think that's a good question. I think the place that we expect, we will set this obligation and folks do need to meet it. And so I think many of the IRP processes may use some of these PRMs, but the timelines is really where I think, to Allie's point, the question of whether folks still do their own modeling to look at the 15 or 20-year timeline, that's pretty far away from a 5-year timeline. When it comes to the near term, certainly we are setting that PRM, and there is a compliance obligation that these utilities have signed up for. And so understanding how those two relate is certainly of interest. And that's why we think it's so important to have the CAISO and the state representative engagement on that setting of the planning reserve margins, so that they can understand what goes into that modeling and what that 5-year look ahead looks like and how it might compare to modeling that they may still be doing or may decide not to do. I think that's something that's really up to them. I don't know if others want to add to that response.
I was just going to say, Chris, FERC has, and the courts have a number of times kind of weighed in on this issue in terms of the minimum versus what states can require above that minimum. So we will have to meet that minimum PRM that RAP sets for us, right, as members of the RAP. And this is, FERC jurisdictional tariff. To the extent that we decide to join the binding program, that is where we will have to be. Certainly a state could come in and require us to be higher than that. And that could be the case for any state. We do planning a little bit differently here in Arizona. We do our plan. It is approved by the Arizona Corporation Commission, but if it's a little bit murky about when it gets approved. We've had plans not be approved, and we are still using that as our plan, right? And we still set that PRM. Traditionally, we're really the ones that are recommending the PRM, and the state is sort of blessing it. They're not coming to us with it. And so I think what we are imagining, right, is we are going to absolutely be using RAP as our guide. I suppose it's still a possibility that we would come in higher than that, but a lot of the benefit that we're hoping to get out of this is that reduction. It's going to be an economic reduction for us. We are very, very reliable. I mean, I can't tell you the last time that we had to interrupt service for any type of reliability challenge. I actually don't know of the last time that happened. Aside from weather-related events or a transformer blowing or something like that, we don't take customers out of power. So for us, this is an economic benefit for sure, and so we're going to want to take advantage of that economic benefit by bringing the PRM down. But this is going to be one of those things where I think the RAP is really going to be setting the minimum, and then we're all going to be it's going to be incumbent on us whether or not we feel like we need to over exceed that.
Gotcha. Thank you all so much. When we have great participants, the hour goes by so fast. We never get through as much as I would like to get through. I do think that a lot of this discussion is to be determined, right? We're gonna work and help. We at WEC will work and help to facilitate anything that we can across the seams. We want to make sure that this reliability opportunity doesn't become a reliability challenge, right? And we really do believe that this is going to assist in the reliability of the West. So thank you so much, each of you, for your participation in the discussion today. Really appreciate everything that we were able to get to. And I'm going to pitch it back to Travis with his air traffic control headphones. He's going to bring
right. Chris, thank you. I just want to give a special thank you to Allie, Partha, Rebecca, and Sarah for joining us today. As Chris said, time flies when you're having a great discussion. So thanks so much for coming and joining us. We appreciate it. The Resource Adequacy Discussion Series does continue next month, May 4th. Again, mark your calendar. It's always that first Thursday of the month, so it'll be at 10 a.m. Mountain Time. Next month, we're taking a look at NERC summer assessment and resource adequacy and how it relates to summer 2023. So please mark your calendars and join us then. Again, to our panelists, thanks for joining us, and the participants, we appreciate you signing on this morning. Have a great day, everyone.